Well, at least Laurie doesn't have to be embarrassed about the Ben Tramer crush anymore. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. As part of the 2021 edition of my 13 Nights of Halloween series, today I'm going to be talking about the 1981 slasher sequel, Halloween 2. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Halloween 2 stars Jamie Lee Curtis, Donald Pleasence, and Lance Guest, and was directed by Rick Rosenthal. Picking up immediately after the events of the first Halloween, it tells the continued story of Laurie Strode, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, as she tries to evade Michael Myers after she's taken to the hospital. When thinking about the Halloween franchise, it's always a little jarring to make the transition from the first film to the sequels. Once you're in the midst of the sequels and get into that mindset, it's not as bad, but it's a big initial step from the first, in quality and legacy. Over the years, I've seen the original Halloween more times than I can count, but I've actually only watched this first sequel a handful of times, at least in its entirety. I remember being really excited when I first saw it the first time and realized it picked up immediately after the events of the first film. However, the style shift caught me off guard, even when I was younger. The original Halloween had kick-started the slasher craze, but in only 3 short years, the game had already drastically changed. Like many other sequels to exceptional films, Halloween 2 faced an insurmountable challenge from the start. The original film didn't have the decades of legacy behind it that it does now, but it still set a high bar. How could a sequel live up to it? In some ways, it almost had a chance. The filmmakers admittedly made some smart decisions. Setting the film on the same night as the first, with many of the same characters, gives the impression of a continuation rather than a true sequel. That automatically makes it feel like this film is at the same level as the first, and somehow more worthy of existence than it otherwise might have felt. As the advertising material said, it was more of The Night He Came Home. Unfortunately, this continuation idea also meant that audiences came in with high expectations. As is often the case, this sequel tries to do many of the same things that were so successful in the first film. It obviously makes logical sense from a business standpoint, but it does at times end up feeling repetitive and like a lesser imitation of the first in a new location and with a few new characters. Although there was clearly a desire to make the sequel similar to the first film, the filmmakers opted to also try to deliver what audiences now craved in slashers, which led to a significant shift in style. The first film was an atmospheric and highly suspenseful, simple, slow burn. It builds tension without relying on gore, or even not many jump scares. Being a direct continuation of that film, and picking up immediately after the climax, it makes sense that Halloween 2 would begin in an emotionally heightened state, but the whole thing just has such a different vibe to it. In the time since Halloween came out, Friday the 13th, its sequel, Part 2, and dozens of other slashers had been released. The genre had evolved. Gore and action were now the name of the game, and Halloween 2 latched onto that concept in an attempt to adapt. The action here is wild and almost random at times, with multiple explosions and plenty of scenes featuring Michael Myers effortlessly breaking through things. There are significantly more jump scares this time around, and the violence and body count are also greatly increased here. There's certainly some enjoyment to be gleaned from the creativity of some of the kills, but they have far more in common with the plethora of kills in the later sequels than they do with the first film. There's very little emotional investment this time around. So rather than being in fear of Myers, we're left excited to see the next creative way he'll dispatch with the cannon fodder characters. That's not to say that there's nothing that's reminiscent of Halloween 1 here. Especially early in the film, when the continuation aspect is at its highest level, there are some filmmaking similarities, like the use of point-of-view shots. And even though the level of tension never comes close to that of the first film, there are still some occasionally suspenseful moments throughout. The scene involving the security guard probably being the most effective. But it wasn't just the visuals that made the first film so unsettling. It was also the audio. And here we see, or should I say here, the return of John Carpenter's iconic theme song. It has some additions to it, and it's not incorporated quite as masterfully this time around, but it still adds a good deal of tension. Part of the appeal of a continuation sequel such as this is the return of the characters from the first film, or at least the characters that survive to return. We do get a handful of people popping up in the beginning, like Sheriff Brackett or Nurse Chambers, but it's really only Laurie and Loomis that get much focus here on the protagonistic side. They were some of the most important and well-loved characters from the first film, so it seems like it should be a win, but much like the film as a whole, they somehow feel entirely different. Loomis was a hammy and dramatic character in Halloween, but he's even bigger and more overdramatically theatrical here. It's entertaining, but not necessarily in a traditionally good way. And then we've got Laurie. Whew. I get it. She had a very traumatic experience, is in pain, and was drugged, but she's just so dull here. Jamie Lee Curtis did the best she could with the script and direction she was given, but man, gone is the resourcefulness and grit, instead replaced by a very generic damsel in distress role, and that's when she's not catatonic. And of course, what would a Halloween review be without talking about Michael Myers? Obvious exception aside. Each of these films gives us a slightly different flavor of the character, with many actors portraying the Shape over the years. But given that this film is a direct continuation of Halloween 1, I wish Michael behaved a bit more similarly here. It wouldn't be as noticeable if you didn't watch the films back to back, but they're intended to be watched that way. His lumbering nature is sorta reminiscent, but his laughably slow pace, especially during that elevator sequence, is more distracting than suspenseful. He has a much more possessed zombie-like quality here, compared to the endlessly driven stalker feel of the first. There's also an expansion on his backstory that, while being an interesting idea, feels half-baked, underutilized, and ultimately unnecessary. Halloween 2 is a decent movie. It has moments that really work, and has inklings of ideas that could have been very interesting, but it suffers as a result of trying to be two very different things. It wanted to be like the first film, and tried to piggyback off of it more than your typical sequel, with the whole direct continuation thing. But it also leaned really heavily into the then current trends of the slasher genre. It's easy to criticize the gamble of that change in stylistic direction now. It's easy to complain about some of the story decisions made here, and also apparently pretty easy to retcon them too. And of course, it's easy to compare this film to the first film, and be disappointed by it. The continuation aspect of this film gave it some weight and the impression of quality, but it also set itself up to constantly be compared to, and forever be in the shadow of, its predecessor. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number 1 is the continuation aspect. Sequels to horror movies weren't nearly as prevalent in 1981 as they are today. So with comparatively few examples to follow, Halloween 2 opted for a fairly unique route. Rather than telling the story of another Halloween night, this sequel picks up right where the last film left off. In fact, the opening minute or two of this film uses footage from its predecessor, before finally giving us a new camera angle to an event we witnessed previously, and then continuing on with the story. By starting this way, the film feels more like a continuation of the first, rather than a separate sequel. In some ways, that's a bit of a hindrance, and the execution isn't the best, but the general concept is strong. The second pro is the hospital setting. Much like my first pro, I'm a little mixed on this one. Once again, I think the idea far exceeds the actual execution. This sequel very easily could have featured Michael Myers roaming the streets of Haddonfield, just as he did in the first film. But in spite of its attempts at repetition with certain elements, it does try to mix things up a bit. So it transposes Michael's stalking from the neighborhood to a hospital. The location change makes sense in the context of the story, and a mostly empty hospital on Halloween night is certainly spooky and unsettling. It works, but doesn't use its new setting quite as interestingly as it could have. On the con side, the biggest issue is definitely the style shift. Now, obviously, franchises change over the years and need to adapt to new genre trends and the desires of fans. I mean, this franchise has certainly seen its fair share of change over the decades. And I like early 80s slashers. The frenetic goriness can be fun sometimes. So maybe if this film was more of a traditional sequel, the style shift wouldn't bother me as much, but this movie is meant to be a direct continuation of the first film. It picks up on the same night with the same characters, right where the last one left. So the change in style feels exceptionally abrupt, and just feels like the wrong decision for this film. The second con is Laurie Strode. It feels crazy to put Laurie in the cons of anything, considering she's one of the most iconic Scream Queen characters of all time, but that designation was certainly not given based on this movie. Jamie Lee Curtis's performance here is fine, but there's only so much an actor can do with a poorly written character. In some ways, the character's lethargy and irritating helplessness throughout the first two acts makes sense. She just went through an extremely traumatic experience and was injured, so you can't expect her to be at the level she was in the first film. But there seems to be a personality change too, that leads to her being a far less interesting character. Rather than being the hero of the story, she just feels like another one of Michael's many victims. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Halloween 2 or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Halloween 2 3 out of 5 paws. It goes without saying that it's a massive step down from the first Halloween, but it still manages to be entertaining in ways that are quite different. It takes on the qualities of a more traditional 80s slasher, but still has hints of what made the first film so effective, embedded in its continuation story. I would recommend Halloween 2 to people who like 80s slashers. If you like the gore, creative kills, and general throwaway fun of those types of films, there will be plenty for you to like here. It doesn't go all out like some of the later sequels do, still sticking within arm's reach of the original, but if you find the 1978 classic a little too slow and have no real attachment to that film, this one might be more to your liking. If you liked Halloween 2, I've obviously got to recommend the original Halloween. It's a much more subdued film than this one, but it's immensely suspenseful and establishes the characters and story that are continued here in the sequel. If you want another slasher sequel, you might want to watch Friday the 13th Part 2, which was actually released the same year. Like Halloween 2, it has the qualities of a typical 80s slasher, with plenty of gore and creative kills. And if you're curious about some influences and are looking for something a little less slashery, you should check out Deep Red, or Profondo Rosso. It's an Italian giallo film from the mid-70s that focuses on some mysterious stalking murders. Plus, it features some very similar imagery, including one particularly brutal kill. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Halloween 2? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite sequel that picks up right where the previous film left off? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe if you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainely Movies. The way life should be.